Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lunch Break Science. I'm Ariel from the Leakey Foundation, and today we explore some surprising aspects of orangutans' lives, how they reproduce, challenges they face in the wild, how access to food plays a key role, and much more. Leakey Foundation grantee Cheryl Knott joins us from Massachusetts in the United States, where she is professor of anthropology at Boston University. She's also executive director of the Gunung Palung Orangutan Conservation Program and Project based in Borneo, Indonesia. Cheryl's work focuses on studying and protecting endangered orangutan populations and their habitats. She also collaborates with local communities to promote conservation efforts that support sustainable coexistence between wildlife and people. Let's welcome Cheryl Knott.
Thank you. Thank you, Ariel. Great to be here.
We are just so excited to have you. It's going to be exciting to, look into orangutans' lives. But, when we think about human evolution, we focus on our closest relatives, chimpanzees, so often. But orangutans, who share about 97% of our genome, also have fascinating traits that help us understand our evolutionary story. What similarities do humans and orangutans share?
Well, there are a lot of things, but one of the most obvious things related to reproduction is that humans and orangutans both do not have a sexual swelling at ovulation like we see in chimpanzees and bonobos. Thus, they both effectively have concealed ovulation, where males don't know, at least from a big visual signal, if a female is ovulating. They also have the same length of the menstrual cycle of about 28 to 29 days as we do in humans, whereas in chimpanzees and bonobos, the menstrual cycle lasts about 33 to 40 days. So there's a couple of features that are quite close. Also, the hormones during pregnancy are more similar between orangutans and humans than humans are to the African apes.
It's amazing how orangutans can teach us so much about ourselves. Their story and ours are deeply connected. And here's the incredible part. You, our viewers, play a vital role in uncovering that connection and so much more. It's not just scientists who make discoveries, you do as well. Your support fuels groundbreaking research, protects habitats, creates opportunities for students, and shares these powerful stories with the world. Right now, every dollar you give goes 4 times as far. If you're inspired by what you've heard, this is your chance to make a real impact. Donate right here on YouTube or through the link in the description. And together, we can uncover even more of the human story. Now, let's hear from Cheryl and dig deeper into her fascinating research. Let's turn the virtual floor over to you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Well, I am really thrilled to be here today to talk to you about some of my work that we've been doing for the last 30 years on wild orangutans in Borneo with crucial support from the Leakey Foundation, who was one of my first funders back in 1994. And what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about two rather unusual features of orangutans. The first is that they have the longest interbirth interval of any mammal. They only give birth about once every 7 to 8 years on average. And they also have a really rare phenomenon, at least in mammals, of male bimaturism, or having two types of fully mature males. So what I want to do today is to explain these two features and how they're actually very much related to each other. Now, to get you oriented to the area of the world that we're talking about, orangutans are only found in Southeast Asia on these two islands of Borneo and Sumatra. And Sumatra and Borneo are mostly in the country of Indonesia, but the Bornean orangutan range also includes the states of Sabah and Sarawak in Malaysia. And our site, the Chobhampanti Research Station in Gunung Palung, is on the west coast of Borneo. So orangutans need vast amounts of rainforests. They live at low population densities of only about 3 per square kilometer. And they have home ranges that exceed 10 square kilometers. Here is it's a video that you can see the rainforests where we work in Gunung Palung National Park. It's one of the lowest, the last lowland tropical rainforest left in all of Indonesia. Our site encompasses these 8 distinct habitats, from peat swamp up to the cloud forest on top of the mountain. It's about a 5-hour hike to get to the nearest village, and we are situated on the banks of this pristine river. The river occasionally floods, creating the alluvial bench habitat, which is the most endangered habitat in Borneo. And we have research buildings that are on the sides of the river here. Our team, we have a lot of people who are working for us. We maintain a constant presence at the site with a large staff of Indonesian scientists and students and field assistants. And one of the things that's so special about these rainforests is the phenomenon of mass fruiting. So this occurs in Southeast Asian rainforests when up to 80% of the trees flower and fruit in synchrony. This happens at an irregular interval of about every 4 to 7 years, and it's tied to El Nino climatic events. And actually, we're having a mass fruiting right now as we speak at the field station. So we monitor these changes in food availability across the different habitats through monthly monitoring of over 7,500 trees. This is a map of our study site that shows those different habitats as well as our trail system. And because of these mass fruiting events, orangutans are really subjected to dramatic fluctuations in fruit availability. And this leads to a boom in fruit and flower production, followed by basically busts of really low food availability and fruit availability following those mass fruitings. Now, one of the things, the main things that I focus on in my research is understanding how orangutan diet and energy intake is impacted by these dramatic fluctuations in food availability. We collect data on and analyze the nutrients and calories of all the foods they eat. And this is showing a really interesting cultural behavior. So the male here, he is eating a fruit called Ketocarpus, and he's going to rub that on the back of his hand, and that gets rid of all the little hairs that are on those fruits. And imagine that you have like a 200-pound animal who is, surviving on these little tiny fruits. So during these mass fruitings, the fruits look like this. Not only do they look appealing to the human eye, but they're also higher in calories. And remember that these mass fruitings only happen about every 4 to 7 years. And then when those things aren't fruiting, then we have periods of, or don't have a mass fruiting, with these periods of low food availability, where they're eating a lot of these kind of fallback foods, the inner layer of bark and pith and leaves and low-calorie fruits. So by collecting data on everything they eat and their activity patterns, we can calculate their energy balance. What this shows us is that orangutans are gaining weight during this fruit-rich period and are utilizing those fat reserves to sustain them during the fruit-poor periods. Thus, orangutans experience these dramatic changes in energy intake and energy balance. So you might be wondering then, well, how does it affect their physiology? And that's the question that I wanted to study when I first went out to Borneo 30 years ago to study these apes. So again, they have the longest birth interval of any mammal and of any ape. And we know that this is one of the important things that changed also during human evolution is the shortening of the interbirth interval. So this, understanding what controls interbirth interval in apes helped us understand what selective forces enable this reduction during our evolution. When I first started this work, the prevailing hypothesis was that primates, like many other animals, would time conception so that weaning would occur during the food abundant period. And this makes sense for temperate zoo animals, or temperate zone animals, not zoo, where seasons are predictably linked to food. But it doesn't really make sense for primates like orangutans that live where the food supply is so variable. So I predicted that these apes would be more like humans, and conception would occur during periods of positive maternal energy balance. So to answer this question, I really wanted to study hormones. Thus, I discovered that what I could do was to collect urine and analyze the hormones and other compounds found in that urine. And you have to be a bit careful when you're collecting urine from a wild ape that's above your head, just not to get any on you, but inevitably that sometimes occurs. Now, one of the compounds that we can measure in the urine are ketones, and ketones are products of breaking down fat, which we can test right there in the field for the presence of ketones. And this is some data from a mass year that shows no ketones are present in between September and March during this mass fruiting period. But then when that was over, orangutans started breaking down their fat deposits for energy, and we were able to detect the ketones in their urine. Now, a second compound that we can measure in urine is C-peptide. And C-peptide stands for connecting peptide. It's a protein which is released during the conversion of proinsulin to insulin. So its production reflects insulin. And it's excreted in urine in proportion to energy mobilization. And these are some data that show that relationship. This is work with my former graduate student and postdoc and now professor at University of New Mexico, Melissa Emery Thompson, where we compared C-peptide to measures of energy availability. So the black line is the availability of ripe fruit, and then the dotted red line is C-peptide in females, and the blue is C-peptide in males. So you can see in these data that there's a real close correspondence between food availability and these changes in energy and balance between in males and females. So we were able to show then through these measures that there are big changes in energy balance related to food availability. And then the question is, how does that affect, or does it affect, ovarian function? And indeed it does. So here you can see estrogen conjugates, and this is a kind of estrogen found in urine. We found that those are significantly higher during the high fruit period compared to the low fruit period. So in orangutans, female ovarian function is really tracking energy availability and energy intake. Now, let's consider a second factor in the link to the interbirth interval, which is the needs of dependent offspring. So orangutan juveniles have the longest period of juvenile dependency of any of the apes, and mothers are providing some nutrition via lactation throughout the 7 to 8 year interbirth interval. Females must also carry their offspring across forest gaps, thus they suffer high energetic burdens compared to many other ape mothers. Because infants are growing slow and are traveling slow, this means that females are also traveling slower, and they can't go as far as when they are foraging without dependent offspring. So all these things are energetically costly, and this leads to maternal depletion. So what does that mean for the interbirth interval of orangutans? Well, for much of that interbirth interval, female orangutans are suppressed, have hormones, female hormones that are suppressed because of the low calorie intake and because of that maternal energy depletion. So the bottom line is that orangutans have such long interbirth intervals because they're energetically depleted with low ovarian hormones throughout the maturity of that long interbirth interval. So what does this mean for males? One thing, it means that there are very few females that can get pregnant at any given time. So opportunities for males to reproduce are exceedingly rare, and this leads to extreme male-male competition for access to those females. And I believe this has led to the evolution of two morphs of fully adult male orangutans, as first recognized scientifically by Alfred Russel Wallace. Now, the adult males that you are probably most familiar with are these males that have the large cheek flanges and the size of their face. They weigh over 200 pounds. These males give loud, long calls that can carry up to 2 miles across the forest. And that's compared to this more familiar kind of male, which is the unflanged male, a male without cheek flanges. These are similar in body size to females, although they actually come in a range of body size. And these males are fully mature and can father offspring. So what's selected then for this phenomenon of male bimaturism, having flanged and unflanged males? Well, this the result of this intense male-male competition is that males cannot maintain the flange state for very long. And this, of course, is different than in a zoo, or in a zoo, you could be a flange male, perhaps indefinitely. But for many males, perhaps most males, it's hard to sort of maintain that flange state for very long because it's very energetically expensive. So here's a chart that shows that, overall, these prime flange males, they have much more energetic stress and increased signs of morbidity, as seen in this chart. So they eat more. Because they're larger, they expend more energy traveling. They have to maintain higher testosterone levels. They also have more wounds. They have higher rates of infection, and they have higher death rates. So it's really much more energetically costly to be a flanged male. And here is an example of what can happen during a flanged male's tenure. So this is a male we call Jarimanus. So that's because his Jarimanus, his ring finger, was bitten off, was smaller. And in this picture, he is looking over at a female that he's been following. And he shadowed this female for several months. He was eating a lot less during this period and traveling more. And then here's what he looked like a year later, after this intense period of mating and consuming less energy. We know because of that finger that it is the same animal, even though he looks very different. His cheek pads have all shriveled up. He lost a lot of his body mass. He's no longer long hauling, and basically a much depleted version of his former self. And this is what a state that I would term being a past prime male. But that effort did pay off because 8.5 months later, this female that he was following, Marissa, she did give birth to a new baby 8.5 months later, and Jarimanus is the presumed father of that baby. So this ability to father offspring is really the key to understanding why be a prime male at all. In all orangutan studies, females prefer flanged males as mating partners. And as you can see from this data, mating events that involve ovulating females showed that the majority of matings were with prime flanged males, a few with past prime, and in this particular data set, we actually had no matings with unflanged males during ovulation. Additionally, if we compare orangutan paternity studies, there is a consistent pattern. This table shows the number of offspring sired by flanged and unflanged males at 5 study sites. And the most recent data on the top come from our site, which was published by my former graduate student and now postdoc, Amy Scott. And we tally these numbers, we see that flanged males have a clear reproductive advantage, producing nearly 3 times as many offspring as unflanged males. Now, remember that those opportunities to reproduce are exceedingly rare. And so this has selected for what I call facultative energy-mediated development. And to sort of explain that, so prime males, as you've learned, can only maintain this stage for a relatively brief periods. They're very highly energetically costly, and there's an increased risk of death. That's paired with females that have these long interbirth intervals and long periods of negative energy balance when they can't conceive. So what I argue is that this has led to this selection of males to have the ability to vary when they develop into those flanged males, that they should time that flanging to occur during periods of good energetic condition, and also when there's a high probability of successful reproduction. And I believe that's selected and led to this phenomenon of male bimaturism. And with that, I'd like to thank my sponsors and my research team, without whom this work would not be possible. And I would especially like to thank the Leakey Foundation for their long-term support. We see here some of the members of the Leakey board who are in the front here, who are able to visit the project during the summer of 2023. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. Please let us know what you think of Cheryl's talk by liking this video, sharing it with friends, and letting us know in the comments below. We would like to thank the Ann and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, the Joan and Donald Travis Education Fund, and viewers like you for making every episode possible. I also want to give a special call out to our live viewers, Ori, Pete, Benny and Anuga, Alex, Jillian, Caitlin, Angel, Akiko, Jay, Morghaze, and Kathy. It's great to see you, and it's always makes up for a more lively turnout, and it's you watching and submitting questions that keeps us inspired. Also, I want to share that next time on Lunch Break Science, we're going to be exploring extremes of human evolution, from largest and smallest to oldest to extreme environments and much more. Be sure to subscribe and smash that notification bell so you don't miss it. Now it's time to answer your questions. Drop your questions in the chat and Cheryl will answer them live now. To kick us off, though, orangutans live in these dense forests, making them incredibly elusive and difficult to study. So, Cheryl, how has technology advanced our ability to locate and study them in the wild?
Well, one of the ways that we are using technology now is to use drones. So because they're mostly solitary and they live at low densities, they can be very hard to find. So this makes population censuses difficult, and it also makes it difficult to find them to collect behavioral data. So they make a new nest in a new tree every night, as you can see here, the male on the left. And the classic way to determine population size has been to walk on the ground and walk transects and count nests. But conducting sufficient ground surveys to really estimate population density is really time and labor intensive. So recently, we, as well as other colleagues, have been working on using drones flown over the canopy to take pictures and then to locate nests in photomosaic. So the picture on the right, those red dots are actually nests. If you zoom in, which we won't do here, but you'll be able to see actually that there's nests in those pictures. And the second way we've been able to find primates to follow and collect behavioral data is to use a thermal drone. So normally when we find orangutans on the ground, we actually use, we just walk around, try to hear them moving, which is often difficult. They don't make a lot of noise. They're not vocalizing. Actually, if you go back, well, we can look at that. There's a thermal drone image of an orangutan climbing here in the trees. And so what we do then is you can fly a drone early in the morning before the canopy is heated up, and then you can see the image of the orangutan showing up on the thermal image. Oh, this one's just showing, yeah. So here we have again showing the picture of that red dot there is an orangutan seen from a thermal drone, whereas you wouldn't be able to see that at all if you don't have that.
Well, let's take our first question from our viewers, and those were like amazing. Like the colors were just so neat, and to actually be able to see the really arms. So Pete asks, can and do Sumatran and Bornean orangutans interbreed?
Well, they can in zoos. In the wild, they've been separated for a long time. They can't physically get to each other because Borneo and Sumatra are separated by the ocean. So, but yeah, in the wild, they can reproduce. They can produce hybrids. In zoos, it used to, but people didn't really pay attention to that and would breed orangutans. But for quite a while now, the zoos have kind of been maintaining those as separate breeding populations, the Borneo and Sumatran orangutans.
So you have received 9 Leakey Foundation research grants, including 2 Emergency Primate Research Fund grants. How important is funding for sustaining long-term research projects?
Well, the long-term funding is really crucial to the success of the project. So orangutans are really long-lived. They're mostly solitary. They're widely spaced out. Thus, it really takes decades to get enough information to understand their basic life history and physiology. It also can take years to habituate individuals, human presence. Plus, the forest is always changing in terms of food availability, so they're continually adapting to new situations. Thus, long-term funding is really crucial to gain that knowledge about orangutans, as well as, of course, other great apes. For instance, those long interbirth intervals, 7 to 8 years, we only know that from long-term study. We only know that they start reproducing at age 15 from these long-term studies of individuals that we can chart, we can follow since their birth. So long-term data is really invaluable, and it requires quite an investment of time and energy to keep everything running.
It's wonderful to see that the site and just everything that goes into such an amazing project like yours. Our next question comes from Elliot. And Elliot asks, the male's feeding behavior with the small fruit seems interesting. Do they have this behavior with a lot of fruit?
Sure. And if we want to show that video, yeah, you can see it. Well, that is really unusual. That was the only species I know of that they actually are doing that, where they're rubbing this this fruit on their fur, their back of their hand. And what makes this, it's what I've been calling this a cultural behavior, is that they eat the same fruit at other sites, where they don't do this behavior of rubbing off those hairs. And so something where they could be doing that someplace else where they're not. That's why we think this is, something they've learned. This is passed on through social learning. And you can see it, the little hairs are kind of float down there. But yeah, they're eating, these are tiny little things. And so a lot of the fruit they're eating is very small. And that's why they spend the whole day have to eat to sort of be able to keep those big bodies fed and going.
It's so neat to see this kind of behavior, and the video is it's just so neat. I mean, it was just so many, but like I say many of us, I'm like the vast majority of us have not seen an orangutan in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
to get that kind of close up look. So you and the Gunung team have made a huge impact by working with local communities. Could you share more about these efforts and why they're such a critical part of your research?
Yeah, well, the conservation programs began in 2000. The research project began in 1994. And in 2000, we started working with local schools to bring school children and teachers into the national park to see wild orangutans for the first time. And that's when we started the Gunung Palung Orangutan Conservation Program, which is known locally as Yayasan Palung in Indonesia. And our program has really grown tremendously. We have a large staff of 65 individuals working across the conservation landscape. Our work has expanded to community outreach, conservation awareness, working with local communities to find sustainable alternative livelihoods, such as actually this woman here is making pandanus mats from non-timber forest products. We also have organic gardening. We have fish farming, and all these are activities that don't involve cutting down the forests or using the lands people already have more productively, so they don't have to cut down more forests. That's a win-win. And one of our main programs now is helping local communities obtain legal title to their traditional lands and helping them manage those lands sustainably, including monitoring biodiversity through camera traps and bioacoustics, as we're doing here. And these programs have really made a real difference in protecting wild orangutans in Gunung Palung National Park and also the surrounding areas, while improving the lives of local people. We also really take a One Health approach, where you cannot have a well-protected environment and wildlife conservation without human well-being. So we prioritize that. And really, this is done by the local people who are living in that area, are the ones who are our staff who are engaged in this work. So you can find out more at www.savewildorangutans.com.
We'll also put that in the chat and the video description, so you're sure to check that out. It's an amazing model for really a thoughtful approach to a field site and really involving the local community, because nothing is possible without them.
Right.
Our next question, let's see here. It comes from, I think, Gary. Okay. Are orangutans herbivores or strictly frugivores, or a blend?
Well, they eat both fruit and plants. So they're herbivores, including frugivores. They prefer fruit, but they also eat the inner cambium layer of the bark. They also eat leaves. They eat pith. And any given day, they probably actually eat a combination of those. So eating fruit as well as other plant matter. They also eat insects, so especially termites at our site. They eat a lot of termites. Occasionally, you might see them going after, sometimes some places they've been seen eating honey, and we have a few very rare observations of mammal eating. We saw at our site, we saw them eating one female once ate a rat, or the head off a rat. That was just one observation. Other places they've been seen capturing slow lorises, but basically only a small number of observations of that. So they can sometimes eat mammals or eat meat as well. But mostly they're herbivores and they're frugivores.
We have another question from Pete. Are there toxic plants, or do orangutans know to avoid them? Interested in intuitive behavior. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good question. There certainly are plants that would be toxic if you ate them, and they are not eating those plants, so presumably that they know to avoid them. Some plants, they have what we call secondary plant compounds, and we can, in our nutritional analyses, we can actually measure those plants. One thing that's interesting is that we can look at what they eat, what they don't eat. So we can look at plants that they're avoiding to see if they have some of those toxic compounds. And we've done some of that work, and as well as sometimes like they might take the skin off a fruit, which you could think, well, they could have eaten that skin, but they didn't. And look at that skin of that fruit to see if it has some kind of compounds in it that would be, be toxic or not. Maybe not toxic, super toxic, but would have other sort of properties that would not be distasteful or might hurt them. So yeah, definitely they seem to be avoiding those things, and that's something that we have been able to actually study with the research.
Okay, our next question is a two-part one, and it comes from Ori. On your graph of energy balance over time, in February, the female's mean energy balance seems significantly higher than for males. Is this behavioral, or are the females foraging more on average during that month? Would that indicate that they are aware of and anticipating the seasonal depletion of high-calorie fruit?
I wouldn't put too much into that, the difference. So I think, is it that graph? Or I think she's talking about the other one. Yeah, so I mean, they have some difference. They might show some differences in that, but we don't really see a big overall sort of sex differences in that area.
Let's see here. We have a question from Debbie. We have quite a few. I'm trying to get through all of them. So Debbie asks, did you say that when phalanges shrink up, that they come back? And where can Debbie find some data on this?
Do they come back? So it's difficult. So we have like one individual that we've seen with cheek phalanges shrink, and they actually were able to recover their condition. Mostly they don't. Mostly they actually probably die after they kind of go to this past prime period, and then they don't live much longer after that, actually. But theoretically, if they were able to recover their condition, they could live and develop cheek phalanges again. I think that actually is quite rare, though, that happens. But it is because it's fat tissue that it is an energetic signal, so that could recover potentially.
Okay, I think our next question comes from Jillian. Let's see. Do you recommend any books to learn more about orangutans or other primates? And there's a second part to it, and both for books for children and for adults. And Jillian teaches third grade, which is amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Third grade. Well, we actually have a book. It's called Face to Face with Orangutans, and that is it was published by National Geographic, and it's a mid elementary book that would be quite accessible. That talks a lot about facts about orangutans. So myself and my husband Tim Lehman, who is the photographer for most of the pictures you saw of orangutans in the talk. So we co-authored this book and all of his pictures. We also have another book. called Operation Orangutan, of the life of Riley. It's actually a cartoon book that we're not the authors, but we were sort of featured in that book. So that's another fun book for kids. And then, of course, there are quite a few adult books on orangutans as well, but there's a couple ones I know about that I've been involved with for children.
We will get links to those and put them in the description and share them as well, because those sound great. We have a question from our website from Bonnie, who asks, what is it like working in such a remote field site?
Oh, well, it's amazing. It's an amazing place to live. It's this huge, expansive rainforest. To walk, it takes about 5 hours hiking, and it's about a day journey upriver in the boat. This video here, we're going to kind of drop down. You'll see the top of the research station, and it's a great community. I think one of the things is that everybody who's lived there and we're working there, people aren't going home at night. They take longer breaks at the end of during part of the month, and so we have a really close-knit community there. And so I think we also feel like this real sort of sense of family. That's one of the things which everybody who works there really kind of expresses that they feel. So it's a great community. This river, we can drink directly from the river, although now we do filter it, but for many years, we just drank directly from the river. You can go swimming. It's just a beautiful place to be, and just to be surrounded by nature. It's very noisy, actually. The rainforest is very noisy. The sound of all the insects and birds and other animals calling. This is showing the front of the research station there. That's where we have that's our main research building there in front, where we have our labs. And we're actually even doing microbiome research, doing in the lab there as well.
So we have a couple of questions about orangutans and visiting orangutans. So the first one comes from Pete. Thanks for the question, Pete. Let's see here. We have are orangutans dangerous for the observers?
No. So orangutans have never, as far as I know, a wild orangutan has not attacked a human observer. So they would be dangerous if you got in their way. I mean, if they were, I think orangutans that have been with humans can be dangerous because they're not afraid of humans. But wild orangutans are habituated to us, but they never have attacked humans. And so that hasn't been an issue, but definitely would not. I mean, I guess if you attacked an orangutan, they would fight back, though, certainly, and I'm sure that they would win because they are much stronger than we are, and have very large canines. So, but if you are a human observer who's just watching them and not interacting with them, then they don't pose a danger.
So the other question, Gary had mentioned visiting mountain gorillas in Africa. Where can orangutans be viewed in the wild, and what role does tourism play in their lives?
So most orangutan tourism actually is visiting ex-captive orangutans. So there's a few sites where they have rehabilitated orangutans both in Borneo and in Sumatra and also in Malaysia. So there's several of those sites where you can see orangutans that were mostly former captive orangutans, former pets that have been released into the wild. So that's the primary orangutan tourism there is. It's hard to do, actually. There's not many places where you can do orangutan trekking. There's some places in Malaysia, I believe, in eastern Malaysia, part of Borneo, where you might be able to do that. But it's actually not really kind of developed like the mountain gorilla tourism. They're harder to find. They're harder to follow, and because they are these rehabilitation places where you can see them much more readily, that really hasn't sort of developed into a big tourist industry in Indonesia and Malaysia. But so there are a few sites that you can look into, but mostly it's the rehabilitation centers. And some of those rehabilitation centers also have feeding platforms, and they can have other wild orangutans might come there as well to feed at those platforms.
How did you become interested in studying orangutans? Was that always your passion, or were there other topics or animals you were interested in studying?
Well, so I've always been interested in human evolution. And honestly, I was growing up, I was really loved watching the National Geographic specials with Louis Leakey. And so he is actually one of my inspirations as a kid, very interested in human evolution. And when I went to college, I majored in what we used to call physical anthropology. Now we mostly call it biological anthropology, and studying human evolution. And I've done a lot of work initially as an undergraduate on studying fossils, and then I got interested in primates and what we could learn from studying primates and studying human evolution that way by studying our closest relatives. So it's really something I developed over time. I also did work in 1992. I was also went to Africa, and I've done a little bit of work on chimpanzees. Spent a summer in Kabale Forest in Uganda, and also collecting urine from wild chimpanzees. But the site in Borneo, it was really a great opportunity because I really wanted to know how the environmental variability was affecting hormones. And because they have this really long birth interval, because the fruit intake is so variable, it was really a good place to go study that, and a good opportunity as well. And so that's, sort of intellectually why I was drawn to that. And I also love the forest and love the people, and I'm still there 30 years later.
So, what advice do you have for someone who is interested in pursuing a career in science?
Well, I think, obviously to go to college and to, pursue higher education, to learn about that. Really to try to get involved if it's science like I do, like a field biology or primatology. I think you really want to try to ideally like volunteer. There's a lot of primate projects that take volunteers, and see if you like it or not. Go out, follow wild primates, see if you enjoy it, see if you enjoy living in the field under field conditions, if that's something that's for you. It also is really helpful to bring other skills to a project. So as you saw, we're using drones. So if you're a drone pilot and know how to do that, that could be a nice skill to bring to a project. Or if you're American, learning Indonesian and working in Indonesia is very helpful. So thinking about other skills that you can bring to whatever project you want to volunteer for or work for is also really helpful. And also, other kinds of like learning lab work, then learning how to do, I measure hormones. We also measure genetics. All those other wet lab skills. Having those skills also is helpful to apply to these questions. So I think learn and get involved. And there's many people doing this kind of work, and so definitely always looking for new young people who are interested in learning about primates.
Let's see here. Gary would like to know if you have met Brute Galdicus, like Jane Goodall with chimps and Diane Fossey with gorillas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, I've met Brute several times. I've also met Jane Goodall a few times as well.
It's wonderful to to be able to get to meet the forerunners of the field. And we're currently working on our archive to release some archival lectures. We actually just released Diane Fossey's lecture from 1973, which was really interesting.
Oh yeah, I think I saw that actually.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear just how far the field has come from those early days, and how many more people are out in the field. And it's the amazing wealth of knowledge out there is just phenomenal. And there's still so much to go. Our last question comes from Pete, which he asks, how do we keep orangutans happy in zoos, and do we need to keep them in zoos?
Well, I think that So one thing in terms of, do we need to keep them? I mean, they are not bringing new orangutans from the wild, are not being brought into zoos, at least in this country and Europe and Canada. And I think that the one issue is that these are very long-lived animals, and we can't, release them to the wild. So for now, yes, we do need to keep them in zoos, because we wouldn't be able to take any of the captive orangutans and bring them back to Borneo and Sumatra. They wouldn't survive. So that's one issue. But there is, I work a lot with zookeepers, because we also collect urine and we measure, hormones, other things in the urine and captive orangutans. So we can learn a lot by studying captive orangutans, and certainly the zookeepers are doing things like enrichment and trying, they're to keep them happy, to keep them interested, to give them things to do. And certainly they have, their healthcare is very well managed in zoos. But I think that, orangutans in zoos can be ambassadors for the species. That is the place that most people can see them. But definitely, we don't really want to be kicking more animals from the wild into captivity, though.
Well, thank you everybody for your amazing questions, and a shout out to Cheryl, Debbie, Gary, and Jeannie, who are also tuning in live. That is all of the questions that we have for today. Although I have been just reminded by the lunch break production team that we have a baby orangutan video that we have not yet showed. So, oh, so what is going on here?
Yeah, so this is a little baby. This is with Walima and her little one there, and just a few months old. It's very cute here, him peeking through that leaf.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. This was an amazing look into the lives of orangutans and some of their really unusual behaviors.
Thank you. It was great to share with you and to talk about some of the work.
Well, thank you all for taking a break from your day and feeding your brain with the Leakey Foundation. Until next time, stay hungry for knowledge. Lunch Break Science is brought to you by the Leakey Foundation and made possible by the generous support of the Ann and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, and the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund, as well as viewers like you. Show your support of Lunch Break Science by subscribing to our channel, clicking on notifications, and giving us a thumbs up, or making a donation to help us create new content. Still craving science and can't wait for the next episode? You can feast on the Leakey Foundation's content library with past episodes, lectures, our podcast origin stories, and more. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you next time.